was a weekend that tested our democracy in more ways than one. Throngs of Jacob Zuma supporters flocking to his Nkandla home, defying the country's COVID-19 provisions, harassing journalists, while police stood by and did nothing. And the police minister's response, well, we did nothing because doing something would have set the town on fire. Oh, for the organization supposedly governing this country, a party that calls itself the leader of society. The Nkandla spectacle has been met with a monastic silence from the ANC. All the party of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada can do is watch as a group of renegades that included its own Secretary General among a host of ethnically mobilized, self-proclaimed warriors sought to terrorize a nation. The police explained their decision, and immediately after them, former ANC Deputy Secretary General Cheryl Carolus gives us her take of the weekend events, which happened at about the same time Africa was bidding farewell to one of the last of a generation that personified high morals, discipline, and a lot of good things of this world. But Cheryl Carolus will come before our panelists also weigh in not only on the events of the past days, but also on what they will also be looking ahead at the events that are going to take place in court tomorrow, and that is where former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers will be making arguments as they seek to persuade judges to rescind or reduce his 15-month contempt sentence. The Watchdog starts now. Okay, we're going to be joined on the line by a police spokesperson, Vish Naidu, in a second. But before we speak to him, take a listen to what Police Minister Bheki had to say this morning when journalists asked him what police were doing in Nkandla. Did they do their job? Why were they not seen anywhere? Take a listen to what the Police Minister had to say.
The job of the police is to enforce the law, but in the same sentence is to protect the inhabitants of the country. So it wouldn't have proper, and it would be reckless. As I'm saying, you didn't have information that there were 100 people that had guns there who wanted to shoot at the police, and once the police is shot at, they must reply. And bullets have no eyes to say this is a child, this is a woman, and all that. To say that police haven't done anything, I've given here the information that we're 20 cameras there. That information is there, that data is there. Besides, we're working with the channels to have the data there. We've sent extra detectives to work on those things. We will be picking our people. That we did not pick them on that particular day, it doesn't mean we're not going to. So the South Africans must they must continue to obey the law. The crux of the matter is that if you break the law, you will be arrested.
Well, that was the Minister of Police explaining why police didn't do what, according to many South Africans, is something they ought to have done when people are breaking the law. Well, let's get some clarity now. Vish Naidu, the National Police spokesperson, joins us. Vish, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Now, soon after the Constitutional Court made that ruling on Tuesday last week, the supporters of the former president made their intentions very, very clear. Were police caught unawares? Did you not prepare?
A very good evening to you, Vuyo, and thank you very much for this opportunity. No, the police were not caught unaware. We do know that people started to converge to the former president's compound since Wednesday, but in very small numbers in the beginning. But the problem there was that the way they positioned themselves at the premises initially didn't constitute a gathering. They separated themselves or divided themselves into groups of 2s and 3s, and they were far apart. You do know that this is a very open field and a rural area, so it didn't constitute a gathering. Then, as the days progressed, right up to Sunday, we found that more and more people were getting there, and then we decided to increase our capacity in terms of establishing vehicle checkpoints, stop and search, and we didn't really have roadblocks per se, but vehicle checkpoints and stop and searches. Now, when the people came through, there's no law that forbid them from traveling, and we couldn't stop them from moving around. It would be an infringement of their constitutional right, their democratic right to move freely. So we allowed them to move. And when they got to the point of around the former president's compound, once again, they divided themselves, and then at one given time, they moved into a group. Now, then the emotions started to flare up, and we as the SAPS, we took a decision that, and history has taught us, that when you're responding to crowds and groups of people where emotions are running high, the risk of doing that, responding to that and trying to disperse such crowds may have a potential of causing physical harm and even possible death through stampedes, through resistance, and so forth. So we took a decision. We'll allow for that to go the way it was, and we will take action later. So while South Africans were perceiving that nothing was being done, in actual fact, something was being done. We are now in the process of opening criminal cases, identifying people responsible. We already know of some prominent people that have been there. And in terms of the Disaster Management Act regulations, we are going to investigate and effect arrest of those people.
Mr. Naidu, people took the pictures of themselves carrying guns.
Yes.
People took pictures and videos of themselves in cars, and they made their intentions very, very clear. I mean, where was your crime intelligence? Because you ought to have activated, certain things long before Saturday and Sunday even happened. And with due respect, what you've just described now, all this stuff that preceded the weekend. At the weekend, every law, every COVID-19 rule, protocol was actually broken. And that is what South Africans saw. And that is why what I'm asking, why that was allowed to happen.
No, sure, Vuyo. I'm not sure what you mean by where was crime intelligence. We anticipated that people were going to demonstrate, to protest, to show solidarity, to show support, in terms of the ruling that was made on the 29th of June by the Constitutional Court. But what I'm trying to explain to you, Vuyo, and the viewers and the listeners is that while we knew this was happening and people were moving towards the place, there was no law that forbid them to move to any place other than from in and out Gauteng, right? They were free to move. Now, when they got there and they gathered, you all saw the visuals of the people, the emotions, like I said, were running high. And if we had to take any action there, the situation could have been much worse than what it was. Hence, we've had people from all corners of South Africa praising the police for displaying the restraint that they've displayed and in being able to contain the situation in the manner that we did. And it's not over yet as far as the police side is concerned. We are going to effect arrest for those people that have contravened the disaster management regulations. For those people that have been watching what happened at Nkandla, please, I must emphasize this. We still are in lockdown, alert level 4 lockdown. We still experiencing this very terrible wave of the virus. We want people to conform to the disaster management regulations that is being put in place to contain this. That what happened in Nkandla should not be an excuse or a passport for anybody to repeat that, because what is to happen now?
But then, I mean, what do you say? I mean, only today you had some pastors, marching and protesting and holding a media conference where they say there's one set of rules for politicians and there's another set of rules for the rest of us. So the integrity of the police force, of the police service is at stake here, because there are people who now believe that you listen to politicians and not do your work.
Vuyo, I'm not sure how better I can explain this. Every situation that we are confronted with, we do a situational analysis and we respond to that situation. Our response is determined by that situation. If we see that that's our response to the situation in, for example, trying to disperse the crowd or trying to disarm the crowd or trying to effect arrest within that crowd is potentially going to result in serious injury and death, we will then opt not to.
Okay.
So in situations where we feel that the threat of loss of life and serious injury is lesser than effecting an arrest, then we will effect an arrest.
Okay.
Now, what you're telling me about the pastors is exactly the same message I'm conveying now. What happened in Nkandla shouldn't be a passport or a reason for anybody to repeat the same, because they too will be held in contravention of the Disaster Management Act regulations. And I know I've responded to what the pastors are saying. We're going to be monitoring that situation very closely. And if there's a contravention of the lockdown regulations there, then we're going to act. They too will do a situation analysis, and we will act, whether it's at that very time that they are breaking the law or thereafter, but there will be action taken.
Okay, let's leave it there for this evening. Thanks very much
thank you, Vuyo,
talking to us this evening. Police spokesperson Vish Naidu. Suppose going forward, if I and my mates want to, cause some mischief, all we need to do is bring sharp objects and big guns, and in all likelihood, police will leave us alone. Time to take a quick ad break. When we come back, we talk to Cheryl Carolas, who is the former Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Watchdog. Now we're now joined by former ANC Deputy Secretary General Cheryl Carolas, who's going to give us her take of the weekend developments, which of course happened at about the same time Africa was bidding farewell to one of the last of a generation that personified really high morals, discipline, and a lot of good things of this world. Ms. Carolas, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. I'm keen to know what went through your mind as an ANC veteran, as you saw the events unfolding over the past weekend outside the former president's home in Nkandla.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers. Vuyo, I was listening to the earlier interview you had with the police spokesperson, and I just thought it's quite sad and quite infuriating, I suppose, that we're sitting here. But I must tell you, in many ways, I am actually relieved, because things are coming to a head. And what I want to do is just to say that the very reason why we are sitting in this unfortunate situation, almost schizophrenic one, is because of the fact that we are dealing with an individual that we should expect better of. This, that whole with the gathering in Nkandla, and I must say my heart goes out to the residents of Nkandla, who are suddenly finding themselves being confronted with this flagrant disregard of the rule of law, total disrespect for our constitution, and putting them in that community at huge risk with this non-compliance with what the very basic things are that we need to do to keep one another safe. And all because of one man who, as I said, we really should be expecting better of. I am actually very upset with our former president. This is a man whom the rank and file members of the African National Congress, and indeed the nation, entrusted to lead us, to guide us, and to protect us. And it's all about him. And that's what all of this is about. You know, the former president has behaved in a manner that is undignified and that, in fact, is inappropriate for an elder and a leader such as himself. His entire behavior is inconsistent and full of contradictions and lies, quite frankly. And I think we must just call a spade and not a gardening implement here. You know, the former president said he wants his day in court. Well, he got his day in court from the Zuma Commission, from the Zondo Commission, to a number of things. Did he take it? No. In fact, disrespected that. He said he's got lots of information on many other people that he can't wait to, in fact, disclose. Well, he lied again. He had his opportunity to go to the Zondo Commission, who's in fact asking people with information of wrongdoing to come forward. He didn't take that opportunity. Now he's throwing his lawyers under the bus. He's saying that he did not disrespect the Zondo Commission. He did not walk out of the Zondo Commission. He says he's an elderly gentleman of 78 years old. He had to go and take his medicine. And he was ill-advised by his lawyers. I mean, it's just shameful that an elder and a leader, a man who was a leader of our country and of the continent and of the world, could actually just say now, no, it's not him. It's actually his lawyers who advised him poorly. You know, we all watched and we listened to the news on the day that he walked out, and I was ashamed as a former ANC leader and as an ANC member. I was ashamed at his behavior. This is a man who helped to draft that constitution, who along with us laid our lives on the line, and he trampled on it. A flagrant disregard. And so, I mean, I am just appalled. And I want to really ask, because there's one person here, I do not think it is appropriate to grill the spokesperson of the police or indeed the minister of the police. There's one person here who can set all of this to rights. He went outside with his mask on and actually addressed the people who speak in his name and asked them to go away and to respect the highest court of the land. That's the answer. And I don't think, it's fair that we shouldn't be focusing on spokespersons of police and also say we should address ourselves to the former president and ask himself to scrape together his dignity and to conduct himself in a manner that we expect a leader of the African continent to conduct himself. And please, when he's doing that, can he respect the COVID protocols? Can he not sit in a press conference with his lawyers right next to him, no social distancing, and they're not wearing masks? He goes outside and he dances around outside his gate without a mask in close proximity to people. Can he please respect the residents of Nkandla? I'm not surprised that the residents of Nkandla has not voted for the ANC because he, the whole president of the country, could not engender over the years the respect. So he finds himself in a ward where even his neighbors don't vote for him and the party that he represents.
Well,
can you please just respect his.
You would have seen him standing there in that truck where the whole podium or stand was erected. Next to him was the Secretary General of the ANC. A position that was once very respected. The people who held that position were held in high regard because they were the face and the voice of the ANC. And next to that particular gentleman was another who is a member of the National Executive Committee and the National Working Committee of the ANC, the head of the organization's Peace and Security Committee. So we can't just, look at the former president alone.
No, look, those are also matters which I hope that we will ensure that the ANC addresses, because it should, because the Secretary General of the ANC is currently suspended, and contrary to what they are saying, is actually prohibited from speaking and representing, speaking on behalf of and in the name of the ANC, he's violating that. And I certainly hope that the ANC will do that in the same way that I do hope that what the spokesperson for the police said, that the police members will also be held accountable to ensure that the law is applied. I hear him, and I must say, I think we should have some sympathy, because I think it's just, I am resentful that ordinary policemen and women are now placed on the spot because there is an international leader of the standing of our former president. The police shouldn't have to do that. He should be doing it. He should know better. But I certainly hope that there will be consequences, because part of why we are where we are today is because we need to ensure that there is a culture of accountability, that people must know that your actions should in fact evoke a sense of accountability and consequences. And if it isn't demonstrated, if no one is going to be charged for what they got up to outside Nkandla, including the former president, then I do think there's a problem. So I certainly hope those consequences will follow. But I do accept what the police spokesperson says, that in a situation like that, you have a judgment call to make whether it's right or wrong. Obviously, that they must accept. We have the right to judge whether the call was right or wrong. But what we do want to see is that somewhere down the line, in the not too distant future, those people who have violated the law will be held to account. And I certainly hope that those cameras were working, that the spokesperson spoke about, and that those people will be charged. Because there must be consequences for this kind of reckless and irresponsible and unlawful conduct of people. So to the Secretary General of the ANC, who is forbidden in terms of his suspension order to do what he's doing there, that he too will be brought to book. And I certainly hope that our organization, the ANC, will do that, will do exactly that. So, but be that as it may, I want to come back to the fact that here we have an elderly statesperson who's invoking his age when it suits him, that he will actually find it within himself to stop being so narcissistic, and that he actually will think about the consequences for our organization. He's still a member of the organization. And for more importantly, will place over and above his factional interests and in fact, even his membership of a party, and place the country first and place the community of Nkandla first. He is causing a risk by not stopping those people from gathering outside his house and himself being party to that behavior. He's putting the entire community of Nkandla at risk to COVID through their conduct there.
Now, part of the reason I had to point that out, that on that stage, he was not alone. There were other members, senior members of the ANC, one of whom, of course, we know is fighting for his own political life. But part of the reason I had to ask that question is because for some time, people have been saying or still think that the country can survive the polarization we are seeing within the ANC. And incidents like this, or as one was watching this spectacle unfolding at the weekend, one couldn't help but say, that is probably a myth. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Vuyo, the ANC is a very resilient organization. It survived apartheid and the military might of the apartheid regime, which was quite formidable. It survived international naysayers like Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And I have no doubt that the ANC can survive this. But I also equally have no doubt that it's really time to give short shrift to people who play fast and loose with the legacy of the likes of Albertina Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, Helen Joseph, Mahima Musa, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo. We really cannot allow people to do this at the expense of the country. That I am a member, and the millions of people who support and vote for the ANC vote not for the ANC for its own sake, despite what our former president Jacob Zuma wishes to tell us. It's not about the party first. We, in fact, support the party because the party represents for us the future that is non-racial, non-sexist and democratic and respects the rule of law. We are the crafters of this Constitution, and we should be expected to be the custodians of the Constitution. And so I do think we should stop pussyfooting around the kind of nonsense that's going on at Nkandla at the moment. Everybody there has the right to due process. Everybody there, if they have information in support of the former president, they should and could go to the Zondo Commission. They chose not to. The person in whose name they speak so recklessly is somebody who had all the opportunities, and then he does this cowardly, shameful thing where he's now blaming his lawyers, and it's just lying. He says he didn't intend to, in fact, disrespect the Zondo Commission. He was just going to take his medicines. He's a poor 78-year-old person who's scared of going to jail because he will get COVID. Well, he hasn't been vaccinated. He has not gone for the vaccination, and he refuses to wear a mask. He sits in close proximity to people, not only risking himself catching the virus, he may well have the virus and he could be passing it on to other people. And I mean, it's all about him. And that's what I think we as the ANC need to take responsibility for. We really need to draw a line below those kinds of things and support the people who are saying that people like the former Secretary General should not be doing what he's doing. He should know of better. He clearly doesn't. Our former president should know of better. He clearly doesn't. But what are we going to do about it? The ball is in our court on this matter too.
You know, there's with you mentioning Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, I can't help, and I wasn't going to go to this point, but I have to now that you've reminded me of one or two things. The irony here is that the person who was close to Ronald Reagan, to Margaret Thatcher, at the time of the struggle, was today the one person who got out and read a long statement explaining himself, his history, and telling us why he couldn't keep quiet on the back of what happened at Nkandla. The party of Albertina Sisulu, of Walter Sisulu, of Nelson Mandela, was keeping quiet. And Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi is the one who came forward and addressed a media conference that condemned everything that was wrong that he saw in Nkandla. Don't you find that a bit ironic?
No, I don't find it ironic. I do think that this is what the Defend Our Democracy campaign is all about. That within it, we as South Africans, regardless of who we vote for, our party political associations, have actually come together and say, our country is in a serious crisis. There's COVID, and then there's this flagrant disregard by people who should know of better, of our constitution, and an attempt to, in fact, directly attack and assault the constitutional court. And so as South Africans, regardless of what our party flags are, we've come together under Defend Our Democracy campaign and said we have to stand together against this assault. So I'm not at all find it ironic or surprising that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has, in fact, spoken out. And we want to encourage everybody, as indeed, as I say, the Defend Our Democracy campaign is a combination of people from political organizations, political activists, civil society, faith-based organizations who have just decided that at moments like this, from the COVID to the assault on the Constitutional Court, it doesn't matter who you vote for. Our Constitution is what unites us. And our Constitution is what we should be defending. So no, I'm not surprised. And in fact, I think we need more of that. That this is what the former President Jacob Zuma has done. He seeks consistently, when he finds himself in a corner and when he runs out of runway, he seeks to find ways to mobilize us on the things which divide us. Whereas in fact, the thing that brought us here, that in fact made us triumph over Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, powerful nations, powerful people who supported the SADF at the time. We survived the guns, we survived the propaganda. Why? Because we stood together as a nation behind the things that unite us. And that's what the Defend Our Democracy campaign is about. And that's what we need to do. We need to, in fact, deal with that situation in Nkandla, not just as the ANC. We need to all unite and not look at scoring cheap political points, even within the ANC. We need to set our differences aside and protect our constitution and protect the Constitutional Court and the Zondo Commission, who's trying to heal this terrible scourge of corruption that has, in fact, just completely destroyed so much in our country and the capabilities. There's far more that unites us than what divides us, for you.
Quick one before I let you go. The National Executive Committee meeting, of the ANC had a meeting today. They were going to tell us what came out of that meeting at around 7 o'clock, but that was changed. It's now going to happen tomorrow. What do you hope they will have achieved today?
Well, I must say that I do hope that most of the time will be spent on discussing the COVID crisis in our country and the fact that we now have hundreds of people dying, and that there is, for the first time, such collaboration between the public and the private sector in our country to deal with this pandemic. I hope that the NEC will spend most of its time looking at that, and that the sideshow in Nkandla will nevertheless be dealt with firmly. But I really expect the former president, a man of his stature who invokes his age, that he will find it within himself to find some dignity and some wisdom as a 78-year-old person to stop that nonsense outside his compound, and to, in fact, that he takes the responsibility to lead us in ending that nonsense so that we can get on with dealing with COVID and rebuilding our country and our economy.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for coming through this evening. That is the ANC's former Deputy Secretary General Cheryl Carolus, now a businesswoman. Still remains an activist, as you just heard, part of that project to make sure that our democracy doesn't go the route that none of us would want it to go. Up next, our panelists weigh in on the very same issues, but also throw forward to that court appearance by former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers as they seek to persuade judges to rescind or reduce his 15-month contempt sentence. That coming up in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. We've come to that segment of the show now when our panelists weigh in on the issue of the day. And tonight it's about the events of the past 5 days, but also looking ahead at the court appearance by former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers as they seek to persuade judges to rescind or reduce his 15-month contempt sentence. Let me start with you, Professor Richard Calland. Just take us back, if you will. Rescind. Some of us are hearing this, term for the very first time, and have been wondering over the past few days what on earth it actually means and what a person can do, when they seek to get the court to agree to do this.
Well, Vuyo, thank you for the question. And I think it's important that, strange word, strange concept though it may be, that we are clear about it, because there's a lot of fake news out there about this issue. The one thing it is not is an appeal. Let's be absolutely clear about that. An application for rescission is very, very different from an appeal. This is not an appeal. He has no right of appeal. And the reason I emphasize that is because a week ago, a lot of people were being told that the Constitutional Court had given a very important, distinctive, historic even judgment, and that being
it was
the
not
apex
appealable.
Court, not appealable. And now, of course, the application for rescission is accepted, and people around the country are no doubt throwing their hands up in the air and saying, what on earth is going on here? A rescission is an opportunity for the court to correct an error. So let's say, Vuyo, you rent a house to me, and I default on paying the rent. And you go to court to get your money back, and the court passes judgment and awards a certain amount of money to you in recompense. But it makes an error It gets my name wrong. It gets the address wrong. It gets the amount of money wrong, for example. You then say, hang on, court, you've made a mistake here. Can you correct that? Because otherwise my order's not the worth of the paper it's written on. And the court will then look at it and correct it. It's not an opportunity for the court to reconsider its interpretation of the law or its determination of the law. And it certainly is an opportunity for any litigant, least of all Mr. Zuma, given his conduct and his approach to this matter, to persuade the court that it was mistaken when it applied its mind. And I say least of all Mr. Zuma, because often a rescission matter comes before the court where there's been a default judgment, where the party wasn't present for whatever reason. And then they come along and say, well, I'm sorry I wasn't there, it was a mistake, and by the way, you've made a mistake. So, for example, in our little scenario about the rented house, what happens is that then we discover that, in fact, it was a different property. And that all the money was paid to you, but to a different bank account, and there was a mistake there. So I come along and I say, I'm sorry I wasn't there at the main hearing. In fact, I did pay the money, but I paid it into the wrong account, and can we correct it? That's the situation. Mr. Zuma is trying to appeal through the back door. He won't succeed.
Professor Nkandla, you saw the spectacle that played itself out over the past couple of days outside the president's Nkandla home. Just your thoughts as you are watching it all unfold.
A little bit menacing, perhaps. Well, it leads you into all sorts of thoughts, scary thoughts about what might just happen. I think essentially, though, it all comes down to President Zuma. These folks are there because they attach all sorts of meaning to him. Some of them are his comrades. Some are part of his Amabuto. Others are looking at him as a fellow Zulu man. There are all sorts of people. You have the militia that is led by Nkandla House. And so they are there to lend support. They think it's been unfairly dealt with. And so, but ultimately there's the issue of the law, the fundamental issue of the law, that in a constitutional democracy as ours, he's been sentenced to serve 2 years in prison. And they are determined, because of their own interpretation of how things ought to go, they are determined that he shall not go to prison. So it all comes down to him. Whether or not he complies with the law or he risks having a shootout of sorts. Because ultimately, the police and soldiers are mandated by law to use force. They are there to enforce court orders and apply the law. That is why they have guns. So that should you resist, should you not comply, should you defy the law, they are meant to enforce that law. And those who shoot then at the police are committing a crime. And they will be shooting, doing all this in the name of Jacob Zuma. So is it the bottom line really is he willing to have all this mayhem happen under his name, or will he, as a citizen, someone who claims to respect the law, be a dutiful citizen and comply with the law? It all boils down to him.
Your thoughts about how the ANC handled this whole thing, Prof. I mean, as you saw what was happening, as we are looking at what was happening in Nkandla, the monastic silence, from leaders of the ANC, when wrongs are actually being committed by people wearing, ANC colors with, ANC emblems. Professor Nkandla?
Well, the KZN and JZ have always presented a special conundrum to the ANC. Even now, with JZ's legal case, the KZN provincial leadership asked for special permission to go to court and support JZ so that you don't get a certain narrative that is anti-ANC developing, because JZ is particularly popular in that part of the country. And so they don't want him to be used by others against the ANC to portray the ANC as if it is alienated from JZ. because of his popularity, they fear that JZ might then galvanize that unhappiness against the current leadership. So it's a delicate situation, a popular figure because of his past, undeniably so, because of his past, a very heroic figure. So you need to deal with the particularity of that situation. That's the one situation. But broadly speaking, I think you could not have expected the ANC to say anything more than what it has done, because what they have been doing so far, at least, is to urge their leaders to comply with the commission, to comply with the law and everything else. Now that the law or the courts have decided, it is up to state institutions to carry out that order. I don't expect the ANC to oppose the court order or the court verdict. Right? So to have expected them to say anything beyond, I'm not sure what exactly you would want them to say. This is not their matter. It's the matter of law and order. So long as they don't tell Nkandla not to execute the order, I'm fine with that. They are doing well. Obviously, JZ doesn't want them. I mean, I was listening to Lindo Sisulu earlier. She was saying while she was there at Nkandla, she wanted to meet JZ, but she didn't really have enough time because JZ was in a rush to meet Amabuto. So Amabuto are a more important constituency today in this problem than the ANC, because the ANC, according to JZ, is throwing him under the bus.
You see, the problem with this, Professor Calland, which is a question I put to the police spokesperson earlier, is that other people read into this something other than what Professor Nkandla says could well be the case, because there are people who think or who assume that instructions were given to the police to let that situation be, even though those people were clearly breaking the law. And secondly, if you listen to the priests who had a media conference today, protesting, talking about their plans, protest plans against the closing down of churches, they are saying these people don't care about us. They don't care about our faith. Politicians, if it's about them, they'll break the rules. But they want us to obey those rules. And those are, let's say, for lack of a better description, the unintended consequences, where if people don't speak and don't speak openly and with clarity, then people make their own assumptions about what is, when in fact it probably isn't.
Well, it's a very delicate situation, I think it's fair to say. I don't think it's of historic importance. I think we shouldn't be careful not to exaggerate the significance of what's happening there. The country is not on the edge of some kind of instability or disorder. This is a localized problem, I think is right to say. So we, as the media and commentators, must be careful to keep it a sense of proportion here. However, it is a very delicate moment, and I agree with Professor Nkandla that it's got layers of nuance, and he's traversed the contours of this dilemma that once again, and not for the first time, and probably not for the last time, Mr. Zuma has put his own political party in. He's put them in the horns of a dilemma now. How do they handle this? And it's an almost impossible situation, a wicked problem almost. And for the police, frankly, I have more sympathy than probably a lot of people, because yesterday they were confronted by a potentially very volatile situation. And if they'd gone in heavy-booted, as it were, then the situation may well have got worse. And it would have taken just one stray bullet to have created a much more problematic situation, obviously, and would have played right into Mr. Zuma's hands. He is trying to create a political crisis. He's trying to create some leverage for himself to bargain with. I believe that's his strategy now, having run out of legal runway almost completely. How the ANC leadership deal with that is very, very delicate. And of course, now that he's failed to honour the order that was made against him, the spotlight is, of course, on the police and the Minister Nkandla, and he will have to make a difficult decision between now and midnight on Wednesday, subject, of course, to the Peter Maritzburg High Court decision tomorrow, I presume. So this is, as you guys in media like to say, a fast-moving story. There's a lot of moving parts to it. We'll watch it closely. And of course, what happens in Pietermaritzburg tomorrow is significant. If the court, as I think it should do, refuses to accept jurisdiction, then the spotlight is even more on the police and on Minister Tele. What will he do? And, you know, there are shades of Marikana here, I'm afraid to say, that something could go wrong. I don't, unfortunately, have great faith in our police's ability to handle these kind of difficult situations with crowds very, very carefully. And, you know, I know that often Mr. Ramaphosa is blamed, or people attempt to blame Mr. Ramaphosa for what happened at Marikana, but we mustn't forget who was the president at that time. And it was his Minister of Police who met with the police commissioner the night before Marikana. And had a conversation, the recording of which mysteriously disappeared, let us not forget. And from that unfolded the terrible events the next day. So I rather fear that Mr. Zuma's kind of 11th hour desperation might encourage him to believe that lawlessness of the sort we saw on Sunday, and even greater unlawfulness, could be to his advantage.
Professor Ndlejana, the courts will deal with the Jacob Zuma issue. How do they deal with the likes of the MKMVA? How do they deal with the likes of Ace Makashule, Tony Yengeni? You know, how do they deal with those people?
Well, they have to act on their own resolutions, on their own decisions. I mean, just recently, part of Ismail Khashule's suspension was that he shouldn't speak at ANC rallies on ANC matters. And just yesterday, he was inciting ANC members against ANC decisions. And so, you know, it's quite obvious that he has violated part of his suspension terms, so to speak. And so it is up to the ANC to act. And it's very important. You see, the problem, though, with the ANC has been that it has not been a rule-bound organization. It depended on who you were with, your friends, what faction you belonged in. And so for quite some time, they would go through this charade of taking decisions, rules, and all that, but they would never be implemented, especially with JZ in charge. But recently, they've kind of found this moral orientation, trying to do things properly. And in the last year, 6 months, maybe a year, they've been doing exactly that. So they need to get onto that path, stay on that path. And one of the ways of ensuring that you entrench this rule-bound behavior, you set precedent, you make these things habitual, you make them into tradition, they become second nature, people don't question, is to be consistent. Now that you have suspended Ace based on this, on him having violated the rule, you must go ahead and punish him if he violates the rule again, so that you don't create any space for people to doubt your commitment to stamping out impropriety. People like Carl, Carl takes himself seriously, but he's such a comical figure. And I don't know why the ANC indulges him. He says the most dramatical or ridiculous things. So Vuyo, the ANC has been doing this for a while now. Sometimes it surprises, sometimes it impresses. The right thing to do, obviously, is to implement the rules, make sure that people behave properly as the ANC intend them to do, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Quick last word from you, Professor Kalland, on the back of the former president's papers, which cite, among other things, that the jail term is a possible death sentence, and that a humane gesture, from the court could be, to look at his age, his health, and the possibility of him going to jail in the middle of a deadly pandemic. On the face of, or on the back of what you said initially about what going to court means, do you think those sorts of things will carry him any favors?
No, I don't. I mean, after all, I don't think the court is well disposed to him, and nor should it be. He has shown the middle finger to the Constitutional Court. His public missives during the whole period in the run-up to that decision were contemptuous of the court. He sought to persuade the public the members of the court were corrupt. He did everything he could to undermine the rule of law, which he has benefited from for so long. His Stalingrad legal strategy depends on the efficacy and the honesty of our judges and our rule of law. That's the terrible irony of this whole situation. But he is running out of legal runway, clearly. Otherwise, he wouldn't be resorting to the political tactics that he's resorted to in recent times. His application, in my view, has no hope whatsoever. The sorts of points he makes are the sorts of points he could and should have made when he had the opportunity to, when he should have come to the court and tried to mitigate his contempt of court. But for whatever reason, either bad lawyering, bad legal strategy, or a deliberate attempt to put himself in this position where he could paint himself as a martyr, where he could claim that the establishment and the rule of law was biased against him, all of the stuff, the unfounded Trumpite allegations that he makes. I mean, sorry to say this, the similarities with what went on in the United States in the last year under Donald Trump, the fake news, the rousing of the rabble, the attempt to undermine institutions, the similarities are there to be seen, I think.
And that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks to both of you, Professors Richard Calland and SABC Nkandla. Well, that's all we had for you this evening. Do join us again tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp.